So back in the day when couples were reunited after being separated from war, let's say Civil War, World War I, World War II, were any of those men that couldn't wait to get out of the trauma of war and get married and have kids, were any of those men avoidant attached? Because it seems to me like the trauma of war was greater than the trauma of love and the emotional neglect of childhood that forms avoidant attachment. Seems like culturally and in their life, things overrode that fear of love because there was far worse things that could happen to you. And I just think it's really fascinating to talk about because we have an obsession with talking about avoidant attachment in terms of how childhood formed it and trauma. And the thing is the biggest reason we have so much avoidant attachment talk is, well, for one, we're obsessed with labels and talking about things psychologically more than ever and bringing awareness to things. But the other reason is that culturally, we have had a casual hookup situationship kind of culture that is avoidant by nature, so it actually enables and amplifies avoidant attachment. Because we definitely see how I believe the attachment styles have probably always been around, but there were things that overrode it, like hunger, poverty, fear of death, survival. And so now conveniently we can suddenly focus on emotional neglect. And I do not want to downplay that emotional neglect is a serious thing and it does cause certain patterns, and it is worthwhile to look at it. It is worthwhile to see what patterns we're in, what's going on, and to validate that, like, the ways that our parents raised us can cause things. There's a cause and effect, absolutely. And I don't mean to mitigate it and say, oh, well, there are far worse things. But what I'm saying is clearly these attachment styles did not rule somebody to avoid relationships to the level that they do now in the 2000s and 2020 eras, because culturally the fear of being different than everyone else in that time was not being married. So culturally, when everybody's getting married, everybody gets out of the fear of war, that your avoidant attachment it's suddenly put into perspective of fear of love is not as scary as fear of dying. So then you get married, you have kids. Doesn't mean that those people, that avoidant attachment didn't come out once they were comfortable, because we clearly see a lot of, the unwillingness for men to engage, like in those baby boomer families and the Great Depression. We obviously see that their kind of stoic man kind of archetype was, glamorized actually. And so it's not to say we didn't have anxious and avoidant, but we did have men, and not to say that women can't be anxious or avoidant. Women can be avoidant too. But we didn't have the level of enabling in culture. They had to rise up because of the circumstances of, for one, they didn't want to stand outside of the herd because that felt like annihilation. So that was scarier. So love was not as scary as that. And the actual circumstances of going to war and seeing people killed or being severely injured, having that level of dehumanization when you're even sometimes often before you even turn 20, that'll do it. That'll make you realize that your fear of admitting you love somebody, saying that you care about them, well, it puts things in a different lens. And I think that's cool to think about. I think that I think that's what a lot of the memes that say, how you can't get a text back, but, men were writing women in these 5-page letters from war. We have to realize that when we go down a rabbit hole of of going down avoidant attachment content, that it's kind of a weird self-soothing mechanism that we do, but it's also, it's not just that. Like, don't get attached to this story about, oh, this poor person, they've been through this and then, because to be honest, they are enabled by the culture. We have been in a long time culture with our phones where, you know, there's so many little layers to it, but like, it's very normal to flake out. It's very normal to just stop texting. And it's not always because of an avoidant attachment or people not liking you. It's also an overwhelm. There's an overwhelm. Like, I get overwhelmed by the constant scroll, the constant, your dopamine is hijacked and you're just kind of in a scattered place anyway. So there are lots of reasons why we avoid. Like, we avoid because the dating culture allows it and because our tech culture is overwhelming. There's a lot of reasons to avoid. Like, I have to avoid so much. And then I start analyzing, like, am I avoidant attachment? Is it this? And, you know, it gets me in a story that is, I mean, it's interesting to look at your patterns. It's interesting to look at other people's patterns, but don't get attached to the story you tell about it. And remember that example of how avoidant attachment has existed for years, but why is it so pronounced now? Look at that instead of looking at, oh, well, just have a realization that the factors of culture matter. They contribute so much to what we're seeing with individuals. And sometimes it's like people, they are obsessed with childhood. And I think it's important to acknowledge childhood, but culture shapes people just as much as childhood. And I think the conversation should be about how things culturally, like even the movies, the TV, the things you're exposed to when you come of age, you tell yourself, well, that's how normal relationships are. Like you tell yourself, when you see your parents, you think, oh, that's how normal relationships are. And you tell yourself from what you see on TV, movies, etc. And songs, oh, that's what a normal relationship is. And both of those are distortions, because there is no, they can put you into assumptions about how love looks that are just wrong. Like, we see that only later, though. In retrospect, we're like, wow, look at all these shows in the 2000s and how they portrayed casual sex as the be-all, end-all. That's no mistake. That has formed the culture of casual sex, and now we don't even know how to act in a relationship because we've never had things last long enough. So we're all like, now we're discovering attachment styles, and now we're overanalyzing all of these types, but it's actually very simple. Culturally, a certain way of behaving was normalized. We behave that way. We've realized it's actually caused more harm than good, and so we're unraveling it. And it comes from both parents and culture. So, hope this was helpful.